So it's kind of fallen to me to at least get the ball rolling with this text. What I wanted to do is, in terms of methodology, give kind of a little quick reflection, launch a question, and then see where that goes, but be pretty controlled on time so that about 4:35 we stop, and then we do critique on the text, critique on how the discussion went, and any other things that come up. All right, so we began 2 weeks ago speaking about complexity, among other things. So our intellectual formation aims at maturing our mind's capacity to grasp the truth. The truth of the world is a truth at various levels, since reality presents itself to us as complex. Last week, we read Wangari Maathai's remark about her 4 years in Atchison. My 4 years at the Mount and the experiences I had both on and off the campus nurtured in me a willingness to listen and learn, to think critically and analytically, and to ask questions. These skills have stayed with me wherever I went from then on. We discussed the habit of mind of integrating knowledge, and through an excerpt from Excordia Ecclesiae, we saw that this approach is very natural for a Catholic university, which regards all truth as having a single source, the Logos, God who reveals himself in the many facets of truth in our universe. We also saw Wangari following the threads of several problems and discovering that they could be addressed through a common solution, which eventually became the Grief Belt movement and a great good for many in her native Uganda and elsewhere. This week, we stem from a value that is central to our lives, that of community. The fact that we were created to live with others, that our development and our destinies are linked. Whether it's Aristotle describing man as a political animal, one made to live in a polis, in a community, or John Donne's poetic proclamation, no man is an island, we have each experienced the joys and the travails that come from being members of a community. The habit of integration of knowledge is necessary because no one branch of human knowledge is wide enough to embrace the totality of truth. Today's habit, thinking collaboratively, is based on a related truth. No one human being's capacity for knowledge can embrace all that is to be known. We need each other to reach the truth. Our different perspectives can complement and reinforce each other. This does not mean, of course, that any answer is valid. Error is possible. None of us is infallible by nature. Falsehood also comes in many shades and perspectives. But it is still true that we will never reach truth in its fullness if we cut people off. If we, like fictional scientist Victor Frankenstein, become obsessed with our own research. If the goal becomes taking credit and being honored versus discovering a truth that many can share and benefit from. It would seem that St. Benedict addressing monks in the 500s AD would have little to do with faculties of higher education in the 21st century. And yet, in order to think collaboratively, we must be humble enough to see that we do not invent truth or dominate it, but that we merely discover it, since it comes before us and gives itself to our intellect when we attune ourselves enough to see it. And since we are social beings, this is most often done collaboratively in a community of faith and scholarship. Yes, I said it. Okay, so I'll throw the discussion open this way. What is the relation between humility and St. Benedict's rule and the habit of thinking collaboratively? Or to start, why do you have to be humble in order to utter those other lines in the same John Donne poem? Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. So I would ask that anybody that talks make a reference to the text or make a reference to the person who has just spoken, whatever you're commenting on, so that we can kind of connect a chain in the discussion somehow.
Can you read your second question again?
Why do you have to be humble in order to utter those lines, any man's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind? did anybody find it strange thinking collaboratively and humility, the rule of St. Benedict?
Well, if I'm not humble, I don't have to think collaboratively because my opinion is the best and I know everything and I don't need anybody else. I am an island and I can be there by myself, or you can join me as long as you agree with me. We take it to the opposite extreme.
So in other words, you have your truth, and other people are welcome to share it.
If I'm totally lacking in humility, the only truth I believe in, whether it's true or not, is what I believe in.
I think collaboration requires people to give a little of themselves and give up a little of what they want so that things can work together.
So what they want, right? So there's something in the text there about that? What's the relationship between humility and giving up what you want?
Degree of humility is that a person love not his own will will make his pleasure in satisfying his desires. So,
I remember Flannery O'Connor saying in a talk that she gave that she found that there are a lot of people that want to be writers, but it seems that they're less interested in great writing and more interested in seeing their name in print. And I think the distinction between those two things is kind of a little bit that same kind of idea.
What struck me from the text is that Benedict is using humility to transform the person to a different type of disciple. And then if you look at what's the very first principle of humility is fear of the Lord. Mm-hmm. But by the time you go through all the different steps, it says, let me read it specifically here. The very end, the last paragraph, I'm going to read the whole thing because then you'll see. Therefore, after ascending, so we're moving up. Humility is the transformation process of the person. After ascending all these steps of humility, the monk will quickly arrive at that perfect love of God, which casts out fear. So we've gotten to the point now, humility is not about fear of the Lord anymore. Humility is about loving God now. And through this love, all that he once performed with dread, he will now begin to observe without effort, as though naturally from habit. And I think you can take anything you're saying with God and apply it to any personal relationship. At the beginning, you may start out with not wanting to offend them or afraid of hurting somebody or whatever it might be. But the whole point of it is to transform the person into where you're loving the other person, and then you really are making their knowledge your own. That's what struck me about this text.
And so how would you see that applying to thinking collaboratively? Right? Not maybe a group of monks, but a group of students on a research project or a bunch of theologians working together on something or a bunch of scientists working on a project.
Well, I think the goal of this is really to move you to love the other person you're working with.
And from a kind of love of the people you're working with, or even a love of the sources you're reading, you could have a kind of excitement to contribute to a body of knowledge that maybe you don't have, right? Like if you think about freshman papers that you may have read, like sometimes it's only very grudgingly that they cite a source, or combatively that they cite a source, or they cite a source and then they never actually correctly unpack what it might possibly mean. and engage it. Whereas if you're in pursuit of a kind of a thesis, of a project, of an idea, we're really kind of marked by thinking collaboratively by the kind of humility that lets you get out of the way so that you can be excited about working in a kind of community as you write this paper. You'd be excited to see what other people wrote. You'd be more excited to engage what other people wrote. You'd be more excited to contribute in the context of what other people have said. There'd be a kind of excitement to cite sources.
I also think it builds trust, right? So we see this in the first day of class, our students are scared of us. They fear us because they don't know what class with us is going to be like. But through the course of the semester, we hope that fear turns into, I don't think all my students love me, but I think most of them. And from that love comes the trust to throw an idea out there. Well, maybe at the beginning of the semester, I don't know how Dr. Wolf's going to respond if I disagree with what he's saying about the American Revolution. But by the end of the semester, they trust me enough to know that they can throw an idea out there that maybe is different than what I'm saying, but through that collaborative effort and through that trust, their views get heard also, and we walk away with a better understanding of that moment that we're speaking of in history, or philosophy, or math, or whatever. I don't know if you can disagree with math theory. I imagine you can. But
People try to.
people try.
But also, even in math or the hard sciences, ideas come from other people, right? I watched when they had the Higgs boson, and I didn't understand hardly anything of what was going on. But when they had the announcement, and to have all these people, and Higgs who was there, and when they turned to him, it was very moving. I was very moved by it, because it's this person's entire life's work validated, his insight validated. It was validated by thousands of people working over 40 years on every continent. Right? That's the only way. You had to build a billion-dollar machine just to test that, right? And that's just a very recent case of it's just there's no way, right? Because even if you have an insight, you might not be able to know. And so I think when we talk about thinking collaboratively, I think our first idea is everybody work together, but there's a kind of a collaboration across time. That's also important, right? And so, knowing the history of your discipline, knowing those because I was thinking about art, right? Art in so many ways, you think of the solitary artist working alone in the studio, right? But yeah, or the basement. But I was going to ask your perspective on it, but at the same time, we were talking about the Norman Rockwell portrait, right? Self-portrait, and he's got a portrait by Albrecht Dürer and a Picasso, and some other things. So the community there is not only a community of people existing in the same time and place, but also, taking advantage of all those disciplines. And that's, I guess that's humbling too, because, you're not the person who invented this.
I appreciate what you all are saying, and I want to be able to draw on it, but moving from the idea that we learn from one another, we cite one another, we give one another credit for inspiring our ideas, we come to trust one another, but that trust for authority and that willingness of the student, particularly a freshman student, to toss something out into an unknown group of people where one person is pedigreed, right? And then we've got the third step of humility is that a person submit to his or her superior in all obedience. How do we help them come past that where they are accustomed to seeing the instructor, right? All of our seats face the instructor as the source of all wisdom. And here we are saying, no, we want you to be part of this community. We want you to be humble, but we want you to throw your own ideas out there. And yet, I think for some of our students, they're going to feel intimidated. Humility won't be the issue for them, rather confidence or taking that risk of floating something out, knowing that either Dr. Wolf or the person or the cute person, and I'm sorry, you're all cute. Right, but how do I keep myself, how do I risk that of getting shut down, and how do I balance that with humility? Humility saying, I don't have anything worthy to say.
Right.
I really like that kind of, well, I like your whole point. And I like how you pointed back at, Josh saying, well, they need to trust me. And being able to trust that, Dr. Wolf isn't going to make fun of what I said in public is based on Dr. Wolf's humility. So in that sense, when we talk about humility, it's not just something we're exhorting the students to do, but it has to start with the professor. And if the person kind of in charge of the classroom is modeling humility, then the whole community in the classroom is built on that kind of humility. And in a way, you see it in the text when it says, like, for all of its examples of humility, like, be like the Lord, the Lord Jesus who did X, who did Y. So you're saying already the whole monastery is built on the humility of the Lord. In a similar way, by analogy, our classrooms, if they're going to be a healthy atmosphere where we can say something that maybe Dr. Wolf isn't going to agree with, I can say that because his classroom is built on his own humility, his own willingness to step aside and say, well, here's this is your space to say your piece.
I just want to add one thing to what Andrew said. Traditionally, humility is a virtue in the middle, where pride is the excess of self-love, and sort of a self-degradation is the defect, or self-hatred, you might say, is the defect. So you want a professor or somebody who can help people. This is Andrew's point. If you're humble, you're hopefully going to make it so they don't have lack of confidence, fear, and a sense of self-hatred. And
yeah, this is another thing, but when theologians get excited about humility, we always have to point out to the students, right? Humility doesn't mean saying the words, I've got nothing good to say, thinking I'm the worst, right? It's best described as a truthfulness, a true appraisal of how things are, without any of the puffery or any of the denigration that everyone's tempted to.
There's that famous line, are you the sage on the stage or the guide on the side? Yeah. And even though if you're guiding the students and we're on this intellectual journey together, unless, if Daphne's teaching French, she might have somebody who's fluent in French and spent their whole life in France, whose French might be as good as Daphne's. But I mean, that's in a rare occasion. So even though you might be the sage, could be the sage on the stage, you're humble, and we're on this intellectual journey together, and if I say my opinion, or that I back up with factual analysis, then your opinion, but guiding us together, is how we're on this journey together, rather than you all are butts in the seat, sit in the receive mode, and just listen to the font of knowledge, and don't argue with me because I'm the font of knowledge.
I think that's really important. I think guiding is important. I think the location of this chapter within the rule is important because you've had the characteristics that you need to have to be an abbot that's gone before it. And I think, as a teacher, you could present yourself and say, listen, this is a tough class, and you got to get by me, right? Whereas when you were talking about the superior there, what would be the parallel in the academic life? Well, in a way, the Lord is the truth of the discipline, right? And the superior could be the teacher, but the teacher is saying, listen, that's what you have to get up is the mountain, and I'm your Sherpa. I'm going to help you up this mountain. And when it said the first degree is the person keep the fear of God before his eyes, right? I find it fascinating because every year I teach, and most of us do, I guess, a 1,000 level class in our discipline, right? And so I have to make a mental effort to remember what it was like to look at this sentence and not know what it meant. Because now, 30 years later, it's an absolute automatic. It's like looking at something when you don't know how to read and just imagining what it's like not to know how to read. And I think that constantly trying to put myself in the, what are they going through, you know? Because we look at this and I'm like, come on, you shouldn't be so afraid of this. What, because I say so? Right? There was a moment when it was intimidating, right? And to say, okay, I was there where you are, and I was no better than you are now then, right? But there's a way to get up this mountain, and I've been there, the view is amazing, and I'd like to help you up there, okay? But I can't carry you either, right? Because you, but if you have done the work, okay, in a literature class, did you read the book? Good. You have a right to an opinion about the book, right? As long as you base your opinion on the actual text, right? It's kind of like the great conversation. So you have to pay the ante to be there. You have to do the work to do it. But once it's there, your opinion, my opinion is no more valuable than your opinion because I got letters after my name. I still have to argue my thesis, right? And you're going to have to argue yours, right? I mean, and it's fine to say something that's slightly different from what I'm saying or contradictory to what I'm saying if you can back it up, right? Because I'm not the be all and end all in this. And I love the comparison here to that ladder, Jacob's ladder, right? And only being humble can you go up. And it's our body and our soul are the sides of the ladder, and the rungs of the ladder are the different steps of humility and discipline that we must climb. And in a way, right, we call our subject disciplines, right? I mean, if you don't work hard at that 1,000 level, right, 3,000 level is going to be hard, right? So in a way, there's also a humility to be patient with yourself as a student to say, everybody wants to go ahead, right? But you got to walk before you can run.
In my class, I try to get them to understand that if they're wrong, if they answer a question wrong, that the whole class learns more from that one wrong answer than from anyone saying a right answer. But it takes humility to put yourself out there, right? To put yourself out in front of the class and get something wrong. Because you want to be right all the time. But to allow yourself to be wrong for the help of the class, that's the middle ground there, right? The humility versus too much self-love versus self-depreciation. So encourage the students. I try to encourage them. I don't say humility everywhere anyway in my class, but I encourage them to, help your other students by putting yourself out there to ask questions and be wrong.
So I have a couple of things. So going back to what Jan said about, this idea of being willing to throw themselves out there, made me think of this verse from Isaiah. And this is from the New Revised Standard Version, which may or may not be your translation of choice, but it's the one that includes the word teacher as opposed to one who is well taught. So in the first passage, the Lord has given me the tongue of a teacher that I may know how to sustain the weary with a word. Morning by morning he wakens my ear to listen as those who are taught. Right, so it's this flipping in the second half of the verse. I have this pinned up next to my computer. And it's this idea that the role of the teacher is to listen to the students as if they are the ones teaching. And I think that as a model fits into what Benedict is saying in the rule, is that the role of humility taken on by the Lord is also the model for us in a way to find the truth. And then on what Janet was saying about the wrong answer, in art classes from the beginning, and from the very first class, Art 1000 is drawing 1, and we're 3 weeks into the semester, and Monday is our second critique. And it is a really tough experience, especially for freshmen, because the first thing we do is everybody puts their work up on the board and we talk about it. And so I say on the first day of class, we have to do this together. Right? There's no way for you to learn how to draw if I'm the only one giving you feedback, because you don't hear half of what I have to say. Right? You have to be here for each other. And so it's about, and that's also a way for them to show me that they're learning stuff that they might not be able to show in their drawing, is to be able to talk about it in someone else's. And so the idea of critique as collaboration, of like, we're pushing each other up the mountain as a group, right? And sometimes you're the one ahead pulling on the rope, and sometimes you're the one behind pushing on someone's butt. But eventually, we're all going to get to the top of the mountain, to use Eddie's metaphor. So I think in terms of thinking collaboratively, it's not cooperation. Right? It's not you do that part and you do that part and I'm going to do this part.
Right. It's like division of labor.
We're not going to come, and we're going to come together and we've each done our part and it all gets done. It's that we're working together, and that requires being willing to be the butt sometimes.
Mm-hmm. I also think these days, and I was made a mental note that when I give this next semester, there seems to be after decades and decades of superhero movies, right? We're moving into the era of the collaborative superhero movie, right? Because it's now, Justice League and Guardians of the Galaxy and the Avengers and Jumanji just happened, right? And Jumanji, I thought was interesting because it's not that you need everybody's special powers to do this, right? In Jumanji, they all end up in a video game and they all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. And the amazing thing is, it turned out that the weaknesses were important, right? At the very end, something would not have happened were it not for a particular weakness a character had, right? So if somebody's struggling in the class and you ask somebody else for help, that might be humiliating, right? But maybe in that scenario, by that kind of weakness that you're showing, that invitation to have somebody help you, something's going to happen to that person. They're going to discover something in a different way that they would not have if they weren't helping you with this. And maybe your roadblock is because Dr. Mulholland is explaining it in one way, and it's just not clicking with you. But somebody else might have a slightly different perspective to share out, and all of a sudden the whole thing becomes easier for you. And when that happens, please tell me so that I can integrate that the next time. But that I think is really important, and it's humility on both sides, right? It's not because I'm great, and I think that the student who's doing well, right, has a lot of work to do on this too, right? Do we want straight A's, or do we want to know something? Right? Because a really good student, grade-wise, could just be very, very good at jumping through hoops. Right? They're very, very good at that. And since they're very, very good at jumping through hoops, they really didn't have to work too hard in high school and whatever. And you try to say, listen, forget it. Forget that. You should, in fact, whether or not you're the valedictorian shouldn't matter to you if you're a humble person. Right? Whether or not you're learning something and that this learning is transforming you in order to transform the world, that's what we're here for, right? And I think that as much as you have to address that to the student who struggles and has to be humble in order to accept help, you also have to, the person says, I'm not going to give help because I'm already doing well and I don't want to jeopardize my grade ranking or something like that. And I think that's probably, we have that less of a problem with that here than in other places, but it could still be there. We got about 3 more minutes.
Well, just an anecdote to that was some similar people probably had this experience, but I had a student come to class, after class, and ask a question. And I'm like, well, that was a really good question. Why did you ask that in class? And they're like, well, I had to figure out if I the only one that had the question. I'm like, you are not the only person that had that question. If you had the question, I guarantee you someone else in there thought that. And they looked at me just like, what? You think so? I was like, yes, come on. And so, but after that, the guy had lots of questions, and like every day this guy had a question, and sometimes it was a derailment, but he asked it, and he would bring it up, and I thought, he just didn't, he never thought that, he thought he was, I guess, the dumb one in class who never thought these questions, and it's like, everybody has these questions, so next time just ask it in class. And that sort of gave him the freedom to to go ahead and do it. And it sounds, in some ways, I think of it as like the, when you were giving the example of all of them being critiqued. I give the example in class a lot of athletes performing and watching game tape. Like the basketball team, after the game, sits down and watches the film, and everybody watches the film, and you know what was done well, and you know what was done wrong. And if you're going to be great, you're going to sit there and be critiqued and be open to being like exposed on the game film. And it's just, I think I use that analogy with the class. It's kind of the same thing.
Does anybody have the pet peeve of handing something back and somebody looking at a grade and throwing it away? And you're like, what about all the feedback I gave you? Right? I love you. I want you to be better. Even if it's 100, you could still do some stuff better. So be humble enough. Look at that first, and then the grades that, either the cherry or the roach on the top of the sundae.
You can bury the grade on like the second to last page. They know that though.
And sort of hide it in a different place every time. I'm just wondering, because of the focus on finding things in the text to support comments, is it a concern for us that in this one, there's not a lot of that I can hang my thoughts on that says that the monk should be watching and listening to other monks? This seems to me to be something the monk on his or her own. So I'm not seeing a lot in here that says that we learn from one another, although I agree. I thank you for all of the examples and comparisons and how to do this. I'm making notes because I'm going to use it. But do we have to, how text-based do we need to be held? Public committee.
One thing that...
So we're now in the critique phase. Okay, which is perfect, because it's right on time.
How did that, what changed?
What we're talking about.
And also you had to take it
Your question was well timed because he had said.
It was perfect at 4:35.
I didn't know it was different from the nature of the comments we've been making before.
It was obvious just
I'm not a conceptual thinker.
I mean, I have to say, like, as soon as you said it, God, that's kind of right. That's very helpful.
Once upon a time, I heard a story about a guy who was a Jewish father who was trying to educate his kids. And the only question he would ask his children when they came home from school was this: and what questions did you ask today?
I had a friend in Spain, and at the end of the semester, he gave them the option to do a written exam, an oral exam, or to give him an oral exam. And I'm like, what? He goes, I can evaluate you on the questions you're capable of asking. Right? I mean, we carry on a discussion for 10 minutes about this, asking me questions. It's going to prove how much you know the material. Addressing that, I'll give you a little story about where this text came from. We want a text from the rule, because it's Benedict. We wanted to use a chapter from the rule. It seemed to be a chapter from the rule that addressed a very important virtue. I recognize that it's not a perfect fit here. One of the ideas that I had was the relationship that it has to the habit of mind is because the reason why you need to be humble is because God's greater than everybody. Right? And the reason why you need to think collaboratively is the truth is greater than everybody. Right? And so there was at least that parallel. And there are times where I think that the text will be a context for a discussion, and there's sometimes when the text will be a pretext for a discussion, and this may be one of the latter.
Works for me.
So I'll add kind of two things. So the idea of being humble is saying that sometimes I don't get to do things the way that I want to do them. And in a community, right, whether that's monks, a classroom, or us as a whole campus, right, that means that sometimes you're putting someone else's needs, someone else's viewpoint, someone else's turn to talk ahead of your own, right? So I think that degree of it really is very functional in actually being collaborative in a group, in a class, as a community, right? The other aspect of this that we all get to kind of riff as we would like on our own is that you'll have the chance to choose a second text and in some cases, potentially even a third text, I guess, depending on what you're choosing, right, to complement this, that could hit the exact spot that you're wanting to hit, that you would be able to illustrate well. You see what I'm saying? That you would... We're giving you a little starter list, but if you all have other ideas, we're certainly welcome to augmenting that list.
Haven't watched Jumanji.
I have a suggestion though, Jan. I have other things in mind I'll probably use when I do the text, but in chapter 3 of the rule, which is right before it, just starts out, it's summoning the brothers for counsel. It just says, as often as anything important is to be done in the monastery, the abbot shall call the whole community together and himself explain what the business is. And after hearing the advice of the brothers, let him ponder it and follow what he judged the wiser course. The reason why we have said all shall be called for counsel is that the Lord often reveals what is better to the younger. So you could just very easily add chapter 3 to think humility, what, chapter 6?
So,
chapter 7. Yeah.
Well, maybe we can add chapter 3. I mean, because this is not an hour of reading.
Right, chapter 3 is...
But I think it's also good to have it go slow. Right?
Yeah, I was just wondering really quickly, do we have all the text that was on Blackboard? It was just 3 pages. I feel like you were reading something that I didn't have.
Well, the version that's on Blackboard is not the one that's in the room.
Right.
No, not the
I have
copy
the
you
rule.
just read.
Oh,
No,
what I was
chapter
reading
7 doesn't
before.
Yeah.
You got to the 12th step, and we got cut off at the end of the third step.
But the word's
Oh, really?
It's a different interpretation.
Oh, right. It didn't go all the way down. I mean, I have the same. The version I have is the exact same translation.
We have degrees. We have degrees, not steps.
Okay.
We have the 2nd degree, the 3rd degree.
And that's what we said.
But that's a different translation.
I think if we go further in chapter 7, we maybe pose with some issues for our students.
Yeah, well, but that's where you can discuss.
Yeah, I know. The 9th step of humility is that a monk controls his tongue, remains silent, not speaking unless asked a question. Talk about oracle of wisdom, and you all just be silent and listen, right? You'll have to work
Step 11, the wise man doesn't talk much. So
That's
why
right.
do you
That's a good point.
wisdom here?
But I think that would be really good to discuss, yeah.
So would we want the whole chapter? Because I was not aware that.
I don't think I was either. That's where it...
Stops it.
Oh, I see. See, I thought you had the whole chapter on there.
No, you read about the ascending, that's not in what's on.
Yeah, no, that's at the very end of the chapter.
I thought it was a problem with my computer.
The ladder was in there.
Yeah, the ladder's at the beginning.
Not the other one.
But I was reading for farther on the chapter.
Yeah, I couldn't
You're
find
right.
that.
What I had is what you didn't have.
So we need the whole chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want the whole chapter on humility, and then probably chapter 3 to go with.
But if we put the point about like be quiet and listen next to chapter 3 about like everyone needs to talk,
together for counsel.
then that gives some tension for talk about how you resolve this.
The 10th step is that one is not easily or promptly moved to laughter.
Right. The rule's not like laughing.
But what did we use?
You can work with that.
I'm trying to think what we used in the BC experience in the fall. We used 2 sections of the rule. It was the preface. And the
71 or
students really,
72.
really responded to it very, very well. It was very...
Was the preface written by?
Or the prologue.
The prologue. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Listen
prologue.
carefully, my son.
Yes, yes.
School word service.
Yeah, and then,
And then the school Lord service at the end.
yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to say a couple things about the original question Dan asked, because when I was reading...
Anything at me.
Sorry. Just a general sense, the zeitgeist in the room, I'd like to address. When I read this, I also thought this is really about the relationship between one person and God more than it is between one person and the community. But we had one line up here before the core text, which was a quote. They should each try to be the first to show respect to the other. It says RB 72:4. If you go to the Rule of St. Benedict 72:4, you'll see that line actually is a quote from Romans. That's actually Romans 12:10. So it might be worthwhile to look in Romans near 12:10 and see if there's something to include as maybe like a supplementary reading.
Well, that's the reading Daphne was talking, because it was ruled, chapter 72, the good zeal of monks was the other part besides the preface.
Right, but this particular quote, which really speaks to that point, is from Romans 12.
Right, I mean, that's in chapter 78, it's the same one.
The quote is the same.
Right.
But the other
He
words
means
around
about the
it-
context
the
of
other words
Romans
around it
versus
was
the context in
Yeah.
chapter 72.
Right.
I love these discussions.
I was just thinking, this is completely anecdotal, and I was just, but when you mentioned just at the beginning, the Rockwell painting, and that he has, you know, in the background, other paintings and
Right.
Picasso. I went a few weeks ago, there's a Picasso exhibit. Did you see that? Did you go to it yet? And,
It's kind of cool.
well, yeah, you learned what a plagiarist Picasso was, right? But I was just thinking about that because
Did he paint collaboratively?
it wasn't very collaborative. It was literally like African sculpture, Picasso's painting that looks exactly like African sculpture. And I was just thinking about the humility, right? And the collaboration of situating the work you do within the context around you versus this work that we've thought is genius for years. And then it was very eye-opening.
He was not the humblest painter.
No. But I was just thinking about that in the context of, you know, humility, and when you brought that up earlier with...
Who is the humblest man?
That's right.
Picasso he would pay by check all over the place, knowing that people wouldn't cash it because they'd keep the signature. And he got off on, got tons of stuff on Twitter.
So if you want to do an exercise in humility versus lack of humility, that would, the Rockwell painting versus Picasso ripping off.
And kind of related to that, if you look at the longer description of thinking collaboratively, like here we have like the 3-sentence summary. If you look at the 3-paragraph summary, there's some helpful things in there. But what I like about the longer descriptions that we give is that at the end of each one, we say like how we live that in college policy. And so if we're thinking collaboratively, we talk about, you know, this is where we suggest having a discussion about don't plagiarize, having a discussion about the, you know, statement of academic misconduct, and I mean, showing that this is a form of humility, right? But also this is how we operationalize that. Because, you know, as a theologian, an idea that ideas are better when you live them out, when you operationalize them, when they function.
Right.
So-
Identity theft is not a form of collaborative thinking.
So I would just point you back to the description of the week, and then, you know, suggest that this could be a good time to state clearly what it means to plagiarize and why you don't do it.
Yeah, speaking to that point, I have a kind of tangential idea, suggestion maybe, is for all of the text that we use, it would be really nice if we would include the citations, just to teach our students what the citations should look like. Because I would like when they're writing out their reflections and they're, you know, including sentences from the text, I want them to cite it correctly as, you know, practice. I want to teach them that. So who do we have on all of the documents, like the correct, I mean...
Or at the beginning, this text, in order to cite this text, do it this way.
Yeah, just...
Excellent suggestion.
There are many different ways of citation, however. I mean, am I going to teach my kids Chicago style, then they walk into your room and you explain to them how Chicago style is absolutely the wrong thing to do,
What we do is
and they learn MLA, and then they come into my class and I say, I don't care about your MLA stuff. I mean, that's fine, but I think we have to find a universal way of citing these.
We can give them the information
Forget it, you're not gonna...
out of which to carve in MLA or Chicago, because either way, you're going to need certain information.
Or we could just go with what they use in English compact. Like that's a class everyone has to take in the study, right?
We can have both.
So is there an agreement in the English department?
Yeah, English uses MLA. Students can use EasyBib anyway.
Yeah.
You put the information in, it makes the citation in MLA or makes the citation in Chicago.
This is a great example of how we collaborate as academics, is that we can't even use the same styles.
Well, that depends on the superior to whom we are, whatever the standard of the discipline is, right?
I like the idea of saying that everybody's going to be doing comp, but not all students come through our comp.
Right.
And so is there any merit to saying, let's use some MLA, some Chicago, some APA?
Yeah. How about this question?
No.
Why not pick one format, but mention the existence of programs that automate the changes?
The students probably have to know.
I would be
programs.
getting this far, I'm sure they know that, because they don't know how to do any of them because of the program.
Yeah, my children who showed me how to cite things, they have no idea how to cite things, but they just click it on the computer and cites it all. And it's all the library pages, it's already there. I have no idea what's there.
You might get a lesson.
Well, you could just look at this book and put the ISBN number in it.
There you go.
In terms of, just in the last couple of minutes, in terms of format, one format among many, right? Give kind of an opening little thing, throw the question out, encourage it to be text-based or at least based on somebody else's, so there can be a chain. I think, well, I would be surprised if we didn't know how to do that. We did it fantastically. And then as the idea of community, that everybody can see everybody. I think it's important, right? So that everybody, because there are certain people that you see following a discussion silently, but they're following, right? Because you can see engagement, and I think that's important for the other people in the class too, right? And then for the director to maybe pull out people that aren't collaborating as much and saying, and one way to say it, does anybody have any questions? Does this remark bring up any questions or something like that? Because sometimes asking a question is a good way to put it.
And remember, they should have questions. They should have written a reflection on this before they show up with questions as part of that reflection. So there should be no one sitting there without a single question, at the beginning at least.
To take the issue being, and Mr. X or Ms. Y, and what is the first question that you have on your sheet?
I think they're going to need, for reflection for this, they're going to need some scaffolding. They're going to need
Sides of the letter.
Like the big scaffolding that you use to like paint the whole side of the house. They're going to be a lot.
So,
for this text.
Well, and so going off of that, I was thinking about that with the conversation that you guys have asked me to talk about for the art pieces later. And in that one, I really do think maybe the best time, like the questions could come before the discussion, but the reflection probably needs to come after it, rather than just from the artworks themselves, once they've had a chance to understand some ways of talking about these things. Because if it's just, I'm looking at these two paintings, I have no way to reflect on that experience other than to say I like this or I don't. And is there a way to vary the methodology?
I think what's good is to do a pre and post reflection, right? You do a pre-discussion reflection based on the reading, and then you have a discussion, and then you come back and reflect.
We've gone around on that a little bit in terms of thinking about ways to try to get them to, the reflection initially from the committee was coming as an idea of an impetus to get them to read and to actually read mindfully and to come ready to have a discussion.
Right, because without that, there's not going to be.
So we thought about ways to try to tag forward too, right? So close the loop, and you're iteratively thinking about this, and how did my thoughts change after the discussion, right? But in that page and a half that we already had a lot of pushback on that amount of grading, that amount of writing.
Maybe we could encourage them at the beginning of it, kind of what I did here, tie in the previous discussion.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So there's, maybe some sort of transition.
And I think maybe in some weeks it would be worth your time the week before the Picasso week to maybe spend 5-10 minutes kind of laying in some of that scaffolding, so that may be something that we recommend as an approach to kind of relay the groundwork there for that week. That might help. I wish we could have them write both. Yeah. I'm not sure we can do it in a page and a half. If you have a way that we can do that, then let's.
I have found something that's sometimes helpful. This would be 3x5 quizzes. Just pass out index cards. If they're supposed to be doing reading, just ask them, okay, what is the most important question that comes up in this text? And sometimes you get different answers to that. And then afterwards, and maybe after a discussion, you could put the 3x5 question at the end of the period instead of at the beginning.
Sometimes after a big meaty discussion, I'll save the last 5 minutes for just a quick write, or we like to talk in education about an exit ticket. But just, okay, now that you reflected before, we have talked, now spend 5 minutes.
And add to your reflection and before you turn it in.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important that they come with a reflection that's there, so that they can use that as a basis, right? Because ideally you want you want people writing during the class, obviously, right? But that might be best of both worlds there. All right.
Before we break, can I go back to your excellent observation that we really need to have the classroom set up so that everybody can see everybody? And it takes us 5 minutes to do it beforehand and 5 minutes to do it after, and there's another class waiting to come in. I'm worried that I'm going to try to say, okay, I need 5 extra minutes, so we're going to end 5 minutes early, so you all leave so I can rearrange the tables for the next
For great
class.
books, we always do it this way. There's always people who come early, and there's always people, even from the next class coming in, that are many hands make light work. It takes about 45 seconds if you have enough people, especially in these rooms.
But aren't we going to have like classes of 30, 35? How many people?
Hopefully, but I don't know. It should be 20.
Last year, I was in a classroom that you couldn't move seats. So if we want to do the circle, we need to make sure that the classroom is able to do that. Because there's some classrooms in Westerman that you can't actually.
We had a good
Then what you do is, like Dr. Winder, you go outside and sit on the lawn, and then all of a sudden the marketing people say, oh, somebody's on the lawn. And they all come out there and they start taking pictures.
after you.
But there's one technique that's used in the great books seminars at and this would be having alternations of people sitting in a circle and others sitting on the periphery, and then switching roles. That way.
Yeah, we were thinking of that, and that could still be another methodology to try out, and then you vary from week to week. But I figured if we have 20 people here, if our class size is going to be 20 people, we have to be able to manage a group this size.
It's fun.
Hey, one second. So the topic next week is metacognition. And this topic, this was more difficult for us to find a core text that we absolutely loved. So as we will work on for next week, it's a video series put together by a college professor, and it's aimed at helping college freshmen understand their study skills and actually learn some practical study skills. So it's a series of 5 videos. They're each about 10 minutes. The last time I watched it, I thought that numbers 1, 2, and 4 were the most relevant. So if you only can watch some, 1, 2, and 4, and I'd like to know your thoughts. So I'm going to lead that conversation, but it's this metacognition, thinking about thinking, what skills work for me as a learner. So. And if you have and we're not really married to that text, so if you do have resources that you feel would be valuable, I'd appreciate it.